This is Teresa Davis, your host of the Grief Mentor podcast. Welcome to Season 2, where together we will journey through the hardships that grief thrust upon us while holding on to the anchor that is trustworthy and true. Here you will find interviews and biblical truths that speak healing into the mind, body, and spirit of the brokenhearted. I'm so glad you're here. Today, guys, our topic is going to be about emotional eating, what that means and what to do about it. And my guest is Margie Odom. Margie is a licensed marriage and family therapist, emotional eating coach, author who specializes helping individuals stop the yo-yo dieting by learning groundbreaking tools and achieving stress management, rediscovering trust in themselves. And she's been doing this for over 20 years as a mental health practitioner. She's a graduate of Emory University, University of Georgia, and Western Kentucky University. Among her areas of expertise are anxiety treatment, trauma, and compulsive eating. Welcome to the show, Margie.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Well, Margie, as you know, my podcast is about grief because Margie and I spent about 12 months together. So seeing her couch in the background today was a little reminiscent of our time together. And I'm so thankful because she was a God-given answer to a desperate call one night to help me in my grief journey. So Margie, you're a blessing, and many positives came from that relationships. I did an episode, Margie, on the anniversary of Andrew's death this year, and it's where we were then and where we are now. So a lot of the tools that I gave the folks, you gave me. I just wanted to mention that if you guys want to listen to that episode, go back and take a listen to that, and you'll hear some of those techniques that Margie helped me learn. While we were working together, though, you were about to release your book, The Weight Within, which, addresses our topic today, emotional eating, which I've read, guys. It's an excellent resource for Margie's own personal experience. It's a road that she's walked herself, so she understands. And she's here today to help us make sense of what that is and what we can do about it. So, Margie, just for definition's sake, let's just explain to the folks what emotional eating is and how do you identify if you are an emotional eater?
Okay, well, emotional eating is about eating to soothe. So when we're eating food for reasons other than hunger, it's not that you can necessarily identify what emotion is triggering it, but anytime you're eating for reasons other than hunger, to soothe yourself, to comfort yourself, that is emotional eating.
Okay, great definition. Because, when I read Margie's book, guys, The Weight Within, it's on Amazon, and I took multiple notes going through it. So one of the things that stood out to me was when you're an emotional eater, you're eating to avoid, basically what you said, what is so intolerable. And you ask a question, what is so intolerable to feel or experience that you need to punish yourself over and over to avoid? And honestly, Margie, I never viewed it as punishment to my body. But since we're talking about grief, there's many ways, and we'll get into that a little bit later about how grief can affect your diet. But that really stood out to me because I never ever looked at it like it was a punishment. But I heard somebody say one time, if you keep eating past full, it's because your brain is still hungry, but it's not food.
Exactly. That's wonderful. Wonderfully put.
I know that I've heard the term emotional eating off and on my whole life, and I never considered myself an emotional eater. However, I am. But can you give us a scenario where somebody might use emotional eating to soothe?
Absolutely. So every client that I work with has a different story, something else that, I learn something new every time I start with a new client. And an example would be somebody who's wonderful in every area of their life. They have great relationships for the most part. Their work life is very satisfying, or, their family life, but they have this one area of their life where they just feel like for some reason this is out of control. And a typical client would be somebody who isn't making the connection that one little area being their food and their eating is out of control because they're doing everything else to such a high level, and they're carrying so much stress, and they're caring for so many other people that they're really not in touch with their own needs for self-care and to eliminate stress and to really set boundaries. All the areas in our life that we sort of take for granted and kind of put on a shelf and just keep moving through. So most of my clients are really high performing people who do great in life, except in this area. And they have to start making connections between how everything goes together and how that emotional eating sort of is showing up because they're not taking care of themselves in other ways.
Yeah, I just felt like you just completely described me right there, Margie. In chapter 7 of your book, you open up, so each chapter begins with a quote, and you have some really good quotes in there. And this one is really, speaks to the grief aspect. All emotions, even those that are suppressed and unexpressed, have physical effects. Unexpressed emotions tend to stay in the body like ticking time bombs, like they are illnesses in incubation. And that was by Marilyn von der Burr. So what a powerful quote. Can you teach us what that means, Margie? What happens when we carry that, and especially in the focus of grieving?
Yes, I mean, grief is obviously a huge example of, what we carry, right? I mean, the reason I titled my book The Weight Within is because it's about everything that you're carrying that's showing up internally and externally. And grief is one of those heavy, heavy things that we carry, but thinking through your question, I think of this in terms of like levels within the body. You wake up in the morning and your mind starts going, what do I have to do today? What are my responsibilities? Or what am I grieving today? What am I sad about? Who's upset at me? Who am I upset at? All the mind racing things that start to happen from jump when your alarm goes off. And some people start their day, maybe what I would call level 3. They have a few things going on and then they just kind of go about their day. But a lot of us start our day more like at a 7 out of 10, an 8 out of 10. And if you're in a state of grief, everything is heavier. So, of course, that number is likely to be very high. And when it's high like that, and we don't intervene and take care of ourselves, it takes very little for something to push and push. And our brains can only take so much. And when our brain gets pushed to a certain level, everything that we're carrying inside gets activated all at once. And of course, we need to soothe ourselves. You can't function unless you do. So, again, going back to that personality I was talking about, that high performing person, we don't want to take time to soothe ourselves with, taking a walk or maybe meditating or, taking some deep breaths or just stepping outside and getting into a new environment. We keep going and going and going, and that number just slowly creeps up, up, up. And so, that's just the weight that we're carrying inside and those emotions that we're holding. And what my clients learn to do is become these subjective experts of their stress level, what they're carrying, what their weight is, and what they need to do about it, and how to apply the tools in the program to release that so that they're not at a 7, 8, or 9. So even if you wake up and your body and your brain starts shooting up like that, how can I intervene right now? And then once my day starts going along, maybe, as I go through my day, maybe my boss was cranky or I got a disturbing phone call or a new project was just dumped on me or one of my kids calls me distressed or, again, the grief, something's creeping up that I'm carrying and that number starts to go up. How do I intervene? And even if it hits all the way to 10, how do I intervene then? Right? Because we have to take care of ourselves in different ways. And the brain, believe it or not, is super lazy. So if your brain learns food works, it's going to go eat, 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 because your brain would rather you feel soothed than stressed, even if that soothing is coming from something that's unhealthy for you, like, Big Mac or something like that, not to just pick on McDonald's, but yes, something that's really not good for you, not really nourishing for you, instead of doing something else that has nothing to do with food to intervene before the brain starts doing that messaging, go ahead and eat that food because we need to get that stress out of the body.
Two things I want to pull out of that segment is that, first of all, self-awareness is a huge piece. So in the grief model, for me personally, because I couldn't sleep at night, and Margie, I know you know all my story, but Andrew died in a very traumatic way. And we're going to talk about trauma here in a minute, but that I held all of that within me. The stress of that was so severe that I couldn't eat. Like I didn't eat all day long. drank caffeine, but I would be up all night long. And so that very thing that you just described, when you become so overwhelmed that you just want to comfort yourself, and I would eat at night, and then I would have no idea that, I would see evidence of what I had eaten and was shocked because I really didn't almost remember it. So it was
Right.
like this response that my body was saying, I need comfort, I need an escape here. So for me, the self-awareness piece is huge, because to pull yourself, like you mentioned, make a conscious decision to get out of that environment, or take a walk, or allow your brain to not be in control to drive you. Because one thing we haven't talked about is like the dopamine hits that we get from some of the foods that we eat, which
Right.
if you're grieving and you're craving dopamine anyway, so you eat and you get this reward, and then it just turns into this whole vicious cycle. That's kind of what I experienced. And of course, talking about false identities, you do address that quite a bit in the book. And that really did speak to me, because I believe, Margie, that the perceptions that we hold about ourselves affect everything. And especially when we're grieving, I believe the grieving process, what I've learned, even in my own personal grief journey, is that the way we feel ourselves and the things that we nestle in there and tend to believe that may even be false identities. You talked about that in the book, cloaks that we take on that other people give us, that affects our relationship with food. And one of the quotes in the book was, this false identity is a combination of changes that we make to adapt to other people and traumas both they and we have experienced along the way. So how does false identities, or in other words, like false statements that we take on as truth about ourselves, affect our relationship with food?
Okay, so yeah, that's a really important piece. I mean, basically, when I talk about that and I talk about the false identity and how we take that on, it leaves us in a vicious cycle. And it's kind of this, well, I'm living in this false identity and I'm trapped and I can't change. And so, the identity of being somebody who's grieving for somebody else, over the years, just in my regular therapy practice, I've heard so many stories from people about how there's certain things that people say. For example, you're so strong, and that is so wounding sometimes. It can be lovely if it's what you need to hear, but it can also be very wounding. And so then there's this pressure. Well, maybe I'm supposed to be strong. Maybe I'm not supposed to cry. Maybe I need to handle it this way or that way, or maybe crying isn't strong. All those questions and beliefs that we start to form. And that's just in grief. But a lot of that false identity piece starts in childhood too, where, you know, um, even though parents do the best they can, they send messages about how to function in life, how to survive, how to cope, how to perform. And we develop something that's different from our original design, how we're authentically made. And it takes many people a lifetime, if they get there, to realize that they're living in this false state. And eating is another way to soothe yourself. So again, if I'm not living authentically, and I really need to cry, I'm really sad, I'm grieving, and I can't because that's not strong enough. What am I going to do to soothe myself? Well, I'm going to do what my little lazy brain tells me to do, go eat some food, or, do something. It's some people, it's, show a different emotion. Like maybe it's not okay to be sad, but it's okay to yell. So I become very angry, even though I'm not really angry at all. I'm really just sad. But none of that feels good, and it's not reconciled in the body and brain connection. So we just turn to whatever we need to calm that mechanism down, and it often becomes food.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's crazy because when you're grieving, what happens is that everybody brings food to your house. That's a common way for us to comfort each other. And, in our culture is to bring food. And most of the time it's not healthy food. It's comfort food and things that, we have come accustomed to that, makes us feel good in our grief. And I think, your piece about the childhood holds so much value in being able to understand the basis of being an emotional eater. So I think that's a huge piece of it. And that's something that, we can't fix on a podcast. So that's something that takes a lot of work, and being able to bring things to the surface that you don't even realize. Like, those false identities we take on, they're so deep down inside. It takes a bit, for us to be able to let those things surface and reveal themselves so that we can, once again, work on them. But so, often when we're grieving, we have this love-hate relationship with food. So just speaking from a personal perspective, the smell of food in the beginning would just make me nauseous because I didn't want anything to do with it. And a lot of times that brings about weight loss. And then when you start eating, you gain weight, and then you develop these habits that are not conducive to a healthy lifestyle because you're eating in irregular patterns. You're consuming, food out of proportion. You may overeat, undereat. So there's a lot of unhealthy habits that we can take on when we're grieving because we're really just not self-aware of our situation. But for the person who is in that situation right now, Margie, what can they do to hit the reset button? What can you tell somebody that's listening right now that's living out what we're talking about? What can they do today to make a difference?
Well, that's a great question. I think mindfulness in general is a wonderful way to get back in touch with yourself. And when I say mindfulness, I know that's a really broad word. So just to narrow that down, breathing, slowing down, slowing the process down. Like you said earlier, after you ate, you could see the evidence of what you ate, but in the moment, you were not present with the food. And I think that's true about anyone who's emotional eating, that we're not really present. I mean, in fact, many people will say, I knew I was full, but next thing I know, there's 20 candy wrappers in front of me, or I was in a really contentious meeting at work and I looked down and I was so embarrassed because there's 20 Kit Kat wrappers in front of me. And I'm like, why was I doing that? I didn't even realize I was doing that. And so getting aware, being willing to slow down, there's some great mindfulness tips. Now, mindfulness will not solve emotional eating, but it will help you become more self-aware. And self-awareness really helps you to start to be like, okay, these are my triggers. These are the areas where I get triggered with food or with people or with boundaries or my environment or with grief. And I'm starting to notice that now because I'm slowing the process down. So, some mindfulness techniques that I'm talking about would be putting your fork down between bites and taking a breath. Really enjoying your food, chewing slowly, swallowing it, feeling the sensation of that food in your mouth and going through your digestive system so that you can actually enjoy it. I think we have this mistaken belief that we're not supposed to enjoy eating and that, enjoying food is like a bad thing. And that's completely untrue. But most emotional eaters aren't enjoying food. They're just eating it really fast and then guilt and shame is hitting. So food should be a pleasurable experience. And so when we're really tuned into that whole experience, we become more present. And again, we start to notice like, wow, I had just a very strong urge to eat that dessert and I wasn't even hungry. What happened before that? What did I experience today or 5 minutes ago or this morning that's really gotten me to this place? And mindfulness is kind of step one for that.
Yeah, that's great advice. And you brought up triggers. So, in the book, there is a system that you've developed where you give, yellow light, red light, green light. And that's that self-awareness piece that makes us aware of foods that are outside triggers, things that happened before is a trigger. But then those foods we need to recognize, the ones that we tend to overeat from a self-awareness piece. So I just recently learned that there's something called the bliss point. I don't know if you've ever heard about that, but food manufacturers actually develop food based on something that is termed bliss point, which means you have to keep eating to try to reach this satisfaction that never actually comes. And so you just kind of keep eating. And I was shocked I've always heard stuff like that, but I didn't know that it actually has a name. It's called the bliss point. So,
Yes.
and, and like I said, we tend to not consume healthy foods always when we're grieving. It's whatever was right in front of us, which often is, but that mindful piece, I think, is huge. And I think it's overlooked, Margie, because it's simple. It's
Yeah,
not, it's not,
exactly.
yeah, it's not this huge, big theory. It's the simple act of being mindful, which is difficult at any time, but even more so, I think, when you're grieving. Margie, I know that your goal that you have on your website is to help us uncover our true potential and lead a life that's worth celebrating. While we can't change difficult situations of the past, we can work together to better understand and resolve challenges in the future. So
Mhm.
tell the folks about your programs and your services and what you offer.
Well, my program just here recently, I switched my model a little bit. I'm really excited about it because when I was originally running my programs, I was doing groups and individual coaching, and people would, after the fact, say, I wish I had a recording of that. I wish I could go back and listen to that. Or, what was that one technique that you taught me? So I started thinking, I really need to get the best of this together and create something that people can have lifetime access to. So I, over the past year, broke my program into 12 sessions and recorded those. So those are available to people on my website. So even if you're already working with a therapist and this is a big piece, but maybe this isn't your therapist's wheelhouse, something that they're well trained in or know how to treat, you could do just the basic recordings of my program and discuss those out with your therapist and work through your trauma with your therapist and still get the benefit of some of the tools and access to the support group that follows the program, after the fact, if you wanted to keep going. But then from there, I move up in levels of care, basically. So if people aren't working with someone else or they really want to work with me directly, they can work with me in either 3 or 6 sessions as they're going through those recordings. And that's called, the initial program is called Silver, and then the middle phase with 3 is called Gold, and the final phase is called Platinum. And basically, the difference is how much access you want to have with me directly. And then after the fact, my favorite thing about Wait Within is community, which is it's never ending. It's open to anyone who's engaged in my programs. And community is a support group that meets 3 times a month via Zoom. So anyone from anywhere can be a part of it. 2 of the sessions are led by me, and they are traditional support group discussion question type of meetings. And then the third is always an outside speaker. So I bring in all kinds of people who are healing professionals from all over, who do things that I don't do, to introduce those people to my clients and to that might be the next step in your journey, someone else who can help you. I know for me, it took a village of people to get me from A to B with my own emotional eating journey. So some of the people I bring on are people like you did with me today, somebody who really helped me along the way, or someone that I've met, just out in the community. Or my speaker from next month is from LA, and I had a woman from Utah a couple of months ago. So people I've just met by being out there in the health and wellness space. Just some amazing people. So I love community. It fills my bucket. And I think it's really unique because a lot of times people do someone's program and then they're like, well, good luck to you. I hope that you're successful, beyond this. But that's not really how recovery from something like this works. You really need ongoing support to make sure that you stay the course and that you can talk to other like-minded individuals who have, worked through some of the same things and can support you too. So I love community, and I feel like it's exactly where I wanted to be right now.
Well, that's awesome. I didn't know that you had created the levels that way. And I love the fact. So when Margie and I were working together, of course I was grieving and I was early in my grief journey. So she would tell me things, and then I would get in the car and I'm like, I can't remember what she said. So I remember I would take a tablet with me and leave it in my car. And as soon as I got in my car, I would write down key points that she had brought out to me, because being able to reframe, when we live in here, we cannot, in a normal day, not even talking about when you're grieving, but it's really, really hard to manage your thoughts in a rational way because those false identities show themselves and then you become overwhelmed with your grief and it's just a big muddy mess. And so having someone to be able to reframe and refocus your thoughts to me is the best tool that a counselor can bring to the surface. And so, I can't thank you enough for the time that we had together when you helped me do that. This is what this makes me mindful of is that a grief journey really never ends. Okay. It just has a different phase. And if you emotionally eat when you're grieving, odds are you were emotionally eater before you began to grieve. So to me, I love the longevity and the levels because then it gives support. You just don't go through the program and quit being an emotional eater, just like you don't stop grieving once you've met with a counselor. So those are great, I think, great opportunities for folks. Do you address the nutrition piece, the food piece, or is it only just the emotional behavior that you address?
That's something that's been kind of on a continuum for me. Lately, I've been partnering with some medical professionals here in Louisville that are handling that part. I am a big proponent, you kind of said it earlier, of just natural foods because when somebody else makes it, manufactures it, I should say, you don't really have as much control over what's in there, but we can't always eat that way, or it doesn't always work for us. So, I do trust the medical professionals to tell each individual person what's right for them. Some people have blood sugar issues, or, they have a food allergy problem or something like that. So I think it will be irresponsible for me to make nutritional recommendations across the board for people. So I've sort of stepped away from that, but definitely have people in my circle that I like to recommend for those things. And I do get asked that question a lot. What do you eat? What's your diet? And I always like to say, it's not perfect. I can tell you that. There's a difference between not emotional eating and being a perfect eater. I like to consider myself a normal eater. And that to me is a huge thing that I'm really proud of because I was not a normal eater for most of my life. So to be able to just say, I'm not stressed when I go into a situation where there's food. I can choose to eat what I want and trust myself to eat the right amount. And it's okay to have something once in a while that's not, in my regular routine, or what I like to call in my book, the green list. I just like to know that I can walk into any situation and feel confident in my own ability to manage it. And that's what I want for every client that I work with.
And that's so well said, because sometimes when you bring the food piece into it, to me personally, it's really not about the food. And if you create a program around food, then everything becomes about the food and everybody focuses on the food instead of focusing on what you're there for and the behaviors. So I believe 100% what you said. I believe when we give the body what it needs, it will do what it's been designed to do. If we can get help with being able to manage those behaviors. What's the name of your website? And I'll include this all in the show notes too, so people will have a way to contact you. But what is your website?
My website is weightwithin.com, spelled like WEIGHT. And I also have Facebook, Weight Within, and also Instagram, The Weight Within. So, I try to post regularly in all those areas. I do have some blog posts on my website and just information. And anytime I'm doing a new program or partnering with somebody, I try to include that information too. So any of those avenues, but my website's where my programs are listed.
And do you still do one-on-one counseling?
I do the coaching. I'm not taking new therapy clients. I haven't been for quite some time. This is really my focus area, and I feel like I'm blessed to be able to really build this out. I do run my therapy practice still, but I haven't added to it in quite some time. So.
Well, good for you. I know this is your heart, and that comes across on the screen. I know it is your heart to help those that struggle with that. So Margie, I can't thank you enough for sharing your knowledge with us. And I will include her book link as well as how to reach out to her in her program. So Margie, I just thank you so much for spending your time with us today. Anything else you want to say before we close out?
I just want to thank you for having me and just say, wherever you are in your journey right now, just find the people that can support you through it, and just know that it's never one person. You move through, and as you grow and you get, in a different stage, there's somebody new, and just be open to those people that cross your path, because they're probably going to impact your healing in some way or another. So it's my pleasure to be here, and I really thank you for it.
Oh, well, thank you too, Margie. And that's all I have for you today, guys. So until next time, take care. If you enjoyed today's show, hit the subscribe button and scroll down the podcast page until you see the 5 stars and leave a review. Thank you for your support, as this will help the podcast reach those in need. If you would like to submit a question to have answered on the air, message me on social media or email me at the address found in the show notes.